beat narrative, can you? You can't beat the story. You can't beat the authenticity of what we've heard here this morning. I want to thank all the speakers for what they've given, not just to us here in this room, but through the media, what they've given out to those who are this week now having to make their minds up. After a long debate, the debate will be closing and it'll be either yes or no. And we're hoping that it will be, after they've heard all these stories, that it will be a resounding yes. We're very fortunate to have a written constitution. That's the first thing. It was very carefully crafted 90 years ago, almost 90 years ago, so that we, the citizens and subsequent generations, would know the political and the social stability that comes from a kind of a trusted, overarching, formal, agreed code that delineates, among other things, and among other very important things, the relationship between the state and us, the citizens. And we're a complex bunch, you know, we're not a kind of a homogenous kind of cohort. We're a very complex bunch. Constitution has some of the qualities of a lodestar. It inspires, it directs, it guides. It also has some of the qualities of something that vindicates, that protects, that proclaims. It should be in some ways a comfort blanket to all citizens, not just some, not just elite cohorts. And for all that it is intended to be steady and constant from the very outset, the very beginning, it was never ever intended to be unchanging or unchangeable. And that's the most important thing we get into our heads these days. The people who drafted it knew that its very strength and indeed the maintenance of ongoing public support generation after generation would depend on its ability to remain relevant to our lives and our times. And they would change, and they have changed. It's no accident that the vast majority of referendums to change our constitution have taken place in the last 30 years and not the first 60 years. Why? Because of the pace of change these past 30 years. It's kind of axiomatic. And that's why we, the people, were given considerable power to change the wording of the Constitution by referendum. It's our power. And it's a power we've used many times to update, to modernise, to revise. And frankly, in a world where democracy is threatened every time we turn around, even overwhelmed, this power that we have is such a very precious gift to us. It was hard won. It's strengthened when we use it. It's weakened when we do not use it, when we neglect it. And so to vote in a referendum is to make our voice count in the civic space. This week, after a very considerable, and I have to say a really fascinating debate, but that debate has gone on for years. It did not just start when the government declared this referendum, as we've heard. How many years has this debate been going on? Those of us with the right to vote also have a responsibility to vote. And so this week, we're called upon to make up our minds, to gather all the information that we have heard, and there's been a lot of it, to put it together and then finally say, can we commit to yes? I have made up my own mind, and for what it's worth, I intend to vote yes to both proposed changes to the Constitution, because I'm persuaded now strongly that they will reflect the overwhelming impulse for equality and inclusivity that is the hallmark of modern Ireland. They'll remove from the Constitution language and attitudes that have long been controversial on account of perceived sexism, and they will also stop, as we have very powerfully heard, the marginalisation of many good, decent people whose strong contribution to family and community life has been completely undervalued, rendered second class. I also believe that in weighing up the pros and cons of the proposed changes, there have been some really invaluable debates. Well, there have been the usual, chicken licking the skies falling in. There's that. But aside from that, we've always had that in every debate on the Constitution. But then there have been really very serious debates as the debates widened and broadened, far beyond, in fact, what these two referenda are fundamentally dealing with. But there have been very broad debates. And I think they've been invaluable around gender equality in the home, in caring, around the meaning of family, around rights and carers, around disability and rights, around government support for citizens' rights. And these debates have been opened up by the proposed changes in the referendum. They won't be closed at all by voting yes. Quite the reverse, in my view. Quite the reverse. These debates are going to gather increased momentum. And they'll get momentum precisely from the yes vote, the vindication that will come from moving and nudging our country a bit further along the line, as our country just takes another step towards the egalitarian future that our citizens deserve, and by their efforts now are creating. And in my view, the referendums on March 8th, they're part of a journey. They're not a destination. They could never be. I mean, as we've heard, I think back to the time when we had the laws on civil partnership were being debated. And some people who were strongly in favour of same-sex rights, of gay rights, were saying, if we're stuck with this, we'll never get gay marriage. This is where it'll all end now. That'll be it now. Were they right? No, they weren't. They were so wrong. They were so wrong. The step brought us just nearer to the further shore that we now inhabit. The first referendum, of course, proposes, interestingly and importantly, it proposes to continue the language from the 1937 Constitution, which says it's going to guard with special care the institution of marriage. So that's given. That stays intact. But at the same time, it proposes new additional wording that's going to acknowledge that in our contemporary society, families may be founded on marriage or not, but they may also be founded on other durable relationships. And we've heard about those durable relationships and how durable they are, how enduring they are, how caring they are, how good they are, and what a contribution they make to the solidarity of our families and our community and our country. Importantly, too, the revised wording of Article 41 will continue to declare, in the language of the 1937 Constitution, that the family is the natural, primary, and fundamental unit group of society. That will stay. And what will stay is the statement that the family is a moral institution, possessing inalienable and imprescriptible rights, antecedent and superior to all positive law. There's words for you now that could keep quite a few lawyers occupied. So many families whose lives have been lived and who enhance our country and whose everyday life is a joy to watch and a joy to behold, because for all their trials and their struggles, they succeed in being family to each other. But they're not based on marriage. They are now going to see in our revised Constitution the respect they have always deserved, the recognition they have always deserved. And we've heard that it does matter. In their hearts and their souls, it matters that they do not have that respect. They do not have that recognition. We saw what we heard from Mr. O'Mara, who now is famous in Ireland for having challenged that culture, but had to challenge it. Thank goodness that you did, to bring it home to us. And still after all of that and your success, your family still is outside our constitutional recognition. That's just unacceptable. It's just not acceptable. The second referendum. So, to vote yes, I believe, first of all, that will be a very, very long overdue leap forward in terms of equality and inclusion. I think of what it will mean to your children, for example. It'll be a real win. And it will also show the value of the step that you took being a step to the step we're going to take in this referendum, step by step. The second referendum deals with a provision also in Article 41 that was controversial highly controversial even back in 1937. It's often referred to as the woman in the home article, refers, as we know, to the importance to the common good of the life of women. Don't argue with that. There are women everywhere, in every sphere, but in this case, in the home. And it says that the state should endeavour to ensure that mothers should not have to go out to work to the neglect of their duties in the home. Some see this article as patronising, paternalistic and sexist. Others see this article as a valuable recognition of women's work in the home, and indeed of motherhood. A large majority of national and other commentators, including United Nations treaty monitoring bodies over recent years, have regarded it as what it is, anachronistic. And it no longer is suited to an Ireland anxious to promote gender equality. However, our government does not propose the simple deletion of those words, though it does propose that they will go. But alongside that long-anticipated deletion, it is proposing to create a new Article 42b, which recognises that the provision of care by members of a family to one another, by reason of the bonds that exist among them, gives to society a support without which the common good cannot be achieved. And it asserts that our governments in succession will strive to support such provision. Now, this so-called carers amendment, in my view, probably is the most exciting development in many ways, with really considerable future potential. For it sees our families as what they are and are increasingly becoming. They are essentially communities of mutual care for one another, team care within the family, not the burden of care falling essentially on one person, but a burden of care, or the joy of care, whichever it is, shared among a community, a team of carers. And I think and as we've heard from some of our participants here today, that's a reality in many, many homes. But it's a reality that sometimes gets no recognition, and certainly none in our Constitution. But it will do after March 8th. Caring for one another is a characteristic of being part of a family. We know that the word care can be stretched across a vast spectrum of everyday family life, from sending kids out to school clean and fed, to getting up 3 times a night to ensure that a disabled or ill child who's tube fed doesn't choke to death in the night, to nursing a chronically ill spouse or a parent, safeguarding a parent who's suffering from dementia, as many people are facing, advocating for the rights, as we've heard, that Frida has done for donkey's years, advocating for the rights of a child who has Down syndrome, advocating for the rights of disabled family members. Just hearing this week about what families with autistic children have to go through in order to establish their rights to just everyday things that make a big difference to their lives and so many others take for granted. And coping then with the litany of everyday ups and downs, crises, some acute, some chronic, that make huge demands of individuals, demands that sometimes can overwhelm, can make family life very difficult, that sometimes provoke, as we've heard, enormous levels of heroism and endurance, durability, and that demand, honestly, just much more than mere respect. They demand respect, but so much more than mere respect. In recent years, that invisible world of what constitutes care within so many families has been revealed, and I think that this debate has been very good in helping reveal what is meant by care, the extent of it both in the family and indeed outside of it, as we've heard. The demands, the frustrations, the relentlessness, the courage, the loneliness, the entitlement to greater visibility, greater support, and greater practical and principled recognition. And I believe a resounding yes vote will place a new spotlight on that world of family care. It'll involve us in a much more dynamic debate. That debate is ongoing. That debate got quite a fillip during this referendum campaign, and fresh constitutional recognition by 2 yes votes and by a yes vote next week, I think will establish those debates as much as a challenge, as a statement of intent. And that's going to be so important. So March 8th is our opportunity to insert new realities, new energy, new insights into parts of our Constitution that have just aged badly and are no longer fit for purpose. That was always going to happen. Those who drafted the Constitution knew it would. They knew it would. That's why they gave us the power to change. There is simply no value in holding on to those out-of-date concepts for the sake of nostalgia, for the sake of maintaining the integrity of the wording of the Constitution. That Constitution was never intended to be inviolable. So to leave these articles as they are would, in my view, contradict the dynamic and the momentum of our people, the zeitgeist, if you like, of the moment. People who cared enough to vote overwhelmingly for same-sex marriage and that big inclusive embrace in 2015, who cared enough to ensure that the tragedies of Savita Halabanafar's death and the death of her unborn child would not be in vain in 2018 when we got the opportunity to rectify that. And I was one of those people who back then, when we had the referendum that put those words into the Constitution, I thought then we were doing the right thing. And I admit that sometimes, thank goodness, we have the courts, that's the other balancing part, who can interpret the Constitution, even in ways that we couldn't imagine. And that's fine, because the dynamism of the country that we live in creates changing times and changing perspectives. And I'm sitting here with Alva, who way back in the day, I remember a conversation with her about that. And you and I know you got it right and I didn't. So we have a lot to teach each other, by listening and discerning from these judgments and these debates and these challenges to us. That's one of the exciting things about living in a peaceful democracy, that we have the peace. Other people don't have it. The peace to debate these issues, to do it intergenerationally, to do it interpersonally, to listen to each other, to listen without interrupting to each other, and to listen respectfully. And then to do what the Constitution gave us the right to do, make up our own minds. Take our voting card, go into the booth, and decide what is best, not just for me, but for my country. What is best for this generation and the next generation? And each of those referendums back in 2015 and 2018, they provoked huge debate. The issues were mightily complex, and they saw our citizens cope with that, The sky did not fall in. We coped. We're educated. Very educated, one of the best educated countries in the world. We're well capable of dealing with the complexities of these debates, and then, having listened, distilling all the evidence, and then putting it over and against where we're at as a people. What do we need? Whose strong voice is entitled to my vote? And I've heard them ranged here today. So far from being a final last word, I see this latest step just a step on the road to further debate. I know many people think the words didn't go far enough, the concepts don't go far enough. That's grand. They go further than the words that are there right now. We take those words out, we put new words in, we move forward. And because we move forward, we take that step forward, we then can look forward to reaching the further shore that we want to reach from here, but we're not there yet. But we will find it easier and nearer if we vote yes, yes on March 8th.